period. We have a mix of folks who are dialed in on phone only or who may be on the computer or using the app on your phone. It is totally fine for you to be dialed in via phone only. That's great. If you are on the computer, a couple of quick things. Please make sure that you have a microphone on your computer so that we can unmute you if you'd like to provide a question or a comment. Otherwise, you'll need to dial in on the phone. Otherwise, we won't be able to unmute you. I'm going to go over a couple of very quick technical things here, just a couple of slides, hopefully some helpful screenshots. If you have any technical questions throughout tonight's meeting, please use that Q&A box. I'll show you here in just a second. So we're going to have a period of time on tonight's call where we'll be taking questions and comments verbally. In order to do that, we're going to ask everyone to raise their hand to get into the queue. To raise your hand, you'll find a little hand icon on the dashboard, this black line. It usually shows up on the bottom of your computer screen. Once you raise your hand, it'll turn green. That's an indication that you're in the queue, and we will call on you when we're ready to get to that point. When we unmute you, we'll call out your name and let you know that you're ready. We're ready for you to speak. One thing to keep an eye on is make sure you're not muted locally. That's just a quick little tip. If you are dialed in on the phone, whether you are on the Zoom client on your computer or not, so if you're dialed in the phone, the way you're going to raise your hand is by hitting *9. *9 will raise your hand for us. We'll see it, and you'll get a verbal indication on the phone that you have been added to the queue, that the host knows that you would like to ask a question. Once we unmute you, you should hear an audio cue that you've been unmuted, and then we will read out the last 4 digits of your phone number, since we don't have names associated with the phone numbers. So if you are dialed in on the phone, it is a good practice to just jot down the last 4 digits of your phone number so you can be on the listen for those digits. We'll go ahead and lower hands for folks, so don't worry about lowering your own hand unless you no longer want to provide a comment or ask a question. Again, that's *9 if you're on the phone. You can also use *6 on the phone to mute and unmute yourself once we actually unmute you. We're going to have about 30-ish minutes of information sharing and presentations, and we ask that you hold all of your questions and comments until we get to the completion of those presentations. So it's fine for you to raise your hand now to get into the queue, but we will not be actually using that queue until we get to the Q&A portion or question and comment portion of the meeting. If you need to use the Q&A box, again, we're not taking comment via the Q&A. That'll happen verbally, but if you have any technical issues during the meeting, this is where the Q&A box can be found. There's a little, it looks like 2 little chat bubbles with the Q&A underneath it. And that, if you click on that, it'll open this dialog box. You can type your question and hit send, and that'll go to all of the panelists and presenters on tonight's meeting. If you have any audio issues and you're on your computer, you can access your audio settings with this little caret that is next to your microphone icon in your dashboard. This is basically if you have a microphone but it's not working and you need to troubleshoot that, all of that information, including testing your speaker and microphone, are located in where that little caret is, that little like broken triangle. So again, for folks who have their hands raised, I'm going to go ahead and lower all hands here in a second and turn it over to Mark at WDFW to start our presentations. We are recording tonight's meeting, just as a heads up. And if you have any technical questions, please feel free to reach out via the Q&A box. So Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. I really appreciate that. 1 second here while I share my screen with everybody for tonight. And are we seeing that, Kirsten?
No, we are not yet.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
So Mark, when you hit the, yep, there you go. Now we see it. Great.
Perfect. Thank you for that again. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for bearing with us tonight. Obviously, there's lots of changes. We've had lots of changes going through this preseason North of Falcon process. We really appreciate everybody's patience and understanding as we work our way through this preseason, trying to get to the finish line here in the next couple weeks with salmon seasons for next year, 2020, 2021. Normally this meeting tonight would be in Mill Creek. So to start us off, I guess I just want to acknowledge Brendan Brokes. He's our regional director in Region 4, and he just had a couple of thoughts for us for tonight. Brendan.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
You're good.
Yes. Good deal. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Yeah, as Mark said, my name is Brendan Brokes. Good evening, everyone. I'm the North Puget Sound Region 4 Director, and just like to thank you all for attending and participating in this discussion in these kind of unprecedented times. Really appreciate you making the time and taking the energy to attend. As Mark said, this meeting normally takes place in our North Puget Sound headquarters in Mill Creek, so I guess I'm welcoming you to a virtual Region 4, so welcome. I'd also like to welcome the folks from the other regions. So as a result of the venue changes that are occurring as we get through these times, we are changing venues around. So other folks from I believe there's folks from Region 6 and Olympic here, so welcome to you too. Again, we really appreciate you attending, taking the time to provide feedback, and look forward to the day when we can hold this meeting in person once again. Thanks much, and let the games begin.
Thanks, Brendan. So just wanted to go over kind of how tonight's going to go. We're going to give everyone a brief update of agency efforts to address changes through the COVID-19 virus outbreak and how the state and other agencies are dealing with it and how that's affecting the North of Falcon process. We're going to do a quick overview of the salmon management framework that we deal with through this process. We're going to just do a quick recap of Chinook and Coho forecasts for Puget Sound. We have done some initial modeling on proposed seasons, and so we want to present that and what that looks like for this year. We're going to go through some of the issues and challenges that we are facing as we get through the next couple weeks. And then the main reason we're here tonight is to take your comments and try to answer as many of your questions as we can. So to start us off, I'm going to ask if Fish Policy Director Ron Warren wouldn't mind addressing everybody. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everybody. I just want to walk through some of the unprecedented actions the department has taken and talk through the schedule about how we will conduct business through this North Falcon season. So as many of you may have heard, the agency took actions today to close all fishing and shell fishing in state waters effective at 11:59 p.m. tonight. We did that for the following reasons. Number one, our first goal in the COVID-19 process was to protect employees, and to do that and keep them out of harm's way. We started doing that a couple of weeks ago with essential staff, and maybe the most visible essential staff are those working at hatcheries. We closed all hatcheries to public entrance to try to avoid public contact. The second piece was that we wanted to assure that we were doing everything that the governor had asked all state agencies and all Washingtonians to do, and strict adherence to the social distancing. And in the recent weeks, we'd seen a lot of gathering in hiking areas, fishing areas, local streams, lakes that had been open, and knew that we were aiding the possible spread of the virus. And so in consultation with other states in the Northwest, our federal agencies, the governor's office, counties around the state, we made the decision to close our fisheries again tonight. So what's that mean for all of us? It means this change in venue, and we will be trying our best to offer as many live stream teleconferences, digital formats, to make sure that we have that same opportunity to hear from the general public through our North of Falcon process, as well as the final PFMC meeting week that would have normally been moved or normally been held in Vancouver, Washington. This year moved to a digital format, just like we are doing this evening. And you can find out additional information at the pcouncil.org website to participate in those. We are working with council staff to have Washington delegation meetings in the mornings, as we normally have at 7 o'clock. The department will also set up conference call lines to communicate with others, possibly at 8 o'clock, but we'll decide those details as we go and let folks know. So we urge you to continue to check our website. That's the easiest way for us to communicate to large groups of people by modifying that information there and letting you know how to continue to help us think about and set regulations for the coming year that meet all of our management objectives, so we can do this for a long time to come. Thanks again for attending tonight. I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Ron. Really appreciate those words. I can just tell everyone from a staff point of view, our staff has been incredible trying to weave our way through this. I think we all have benefited from technology in these uncertain times. Many of us are in our kitchens or living rooms or basements trying to carry on our business as usual. And I really just want to give a shout out to all our staff for making everything come together on this. So, so I wanted to go over just a quick bit about our management framework. People who are familiar with this process are pretty familiar with how things operate. We have a lot of things that guide our management, a lot of constrictions to our management or constraints based on conservation concerns and agreements, both internationally through the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and then also with our treaty tribes here in Washington and Oregon. Obviously, the coastal fisheries are governed through the Pacific Fishery Management Council. I talked about our inside fisheries, how they're governed. We're also constrained through the Endangered Species Act, the limitations that are placed on our conservation constraints through the ESA. And then every year, we have different constraints, and sometimes they're the same constraints on different forecasted run sizes and escapement goals to the different systems that we need to meet. A simplified view of kind of the North of Falcon process. It starts in January, really, when biologists from the state and tribes are getting together and looking at all the data that we collect through the year and going through the forecasts of abundance. We go through different modeling exercises to determine if there's harvestable surplus. We're in this section now where we're proposing fisheries and we're modeling fisheries to try to determine what kind of fishing levels we can have on these stocks of concern. With that, we're negotiating with the tribes. We're negotiating between user groups, marine opportunity, freshwater opportunity, trying to take all that into consideration as we craft a fisheries package, which we tried to get to by the usually early part of April. It's called the LOF. It's the List of Agreed Fisheries. And that helps the first step in getting our salmon seasons in place. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to our Puget Sound recreational fishing biologist, David Stormer. He's going to run through some of our Chinook and Coho forecasts really quick for Puget Sound for this year, and talk through a little bit of some of the stocks that may be constraining for this year. David.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. Some folks have maybe already seen some of the forecasts if they were present at the North of Falcon 1 public meeting, but I'll just give you a sort of a brief overview of where we are forecast-wise. This is a chart here of the last 10 years of forecasts for both hatchery and wild Chinook, and the hatchery stocks are in the dark shaded bars and the wild stocks are in the lighter shaded bars. So overall, hatchery stocks are up about 14% from the most recent 10-year average, while wild stocks are down roughly 6%. Maybe if you could move that slide for me, Mark. So on the next slide, we see this is sort of broken down by basin. And so the for wild forecasts of Chinook salmon, you'll see the 2019 column versus the 2020 or this year's forecast, and then a comparison, a relative difference between this year and last year's forecasts. So for wild Chinook, I'll point you to the Stillaguamish stock. Although the forecasted returns for this year are similar to last year, there's still continued low returns, and so that will likely or will be a constraining stock for this year for fisheries. And then throughout the rest of the sound, things look a bit similar from this year to last year. Moving on to hatchery Chinook forecasts for this year, they're down a bit in the for the stocks in the Straits, and then in the North Sound looks somewhat or mostly similar to last year, and about a 6% decline between last year and this year. Mark, if you could go back a slide real quick to wild stocks. So I will point you also to the Mid-Hood Canal stock with only 39 fish forecasted, wild fish forecasted to come back to Mid-Hood Canal. This stock will be a constrainer to fisheries this year as well. So for Coho, again, similar to Chinook, hatchery stocks are up roughly 32% from the most recent 10-year average, but wild stocks are down roughly 50% from the last 10 years. Looking at it by basin, almost across the board, natural origin returning Coho are down from for this year versus last year. I would point you to the Snohomish system, where our escapement goal is 50,000 wild returning Coho, and the forecasted return is for less than that, only 39,000. And overall, we're at about roughly half forecasted returns to Puget Sound this year than last year. It's not looking quite as bad for hatchery stocks. It's sort of a mixed bag throughout the sound, but overall, we're down about 12% from this year to last year for hatchery returning Coho. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark to talk about ocean options and initial fisheries modeling.
Thanks, David. So coming out of the first March Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting, that is where ocean options are set for the year. On the screen, you'll see that I have Chinook, non-treaty Chinook and Coho alternatives for ocean fisheries for this year. If folks want to remember, last year's final non-treaty ocean package had Chinook at 52,500, and Coho was a much higher number. I don't remember exactly where it landed, but it was well over 100,000, and that run didn't materialize last year. So obviously historic low returns to the Columbia River and some of the coastal stocks this year. they're in real trouble. So you'll notice quite a dramatic decline from last year in the available coho options. I would also point to the alternative 3, the low option for each of these salmon fisheries species on these fisheries in the ocean is a closed fishing option for this summer. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that we were taking that into consideration as one of our alternatives, given the low forecasted returns for coho to those streams for this year. So moving on, I wanted to go over a little bit of the initial modeling proposals for this year. So you'll see in some of the concurrent slides from this one that Stillaguamish and Mid-Hood Canal are really our big constraining stocks from this year. We have been consulting with sports fishermen as well as our Sport Fishing Advisory Board this spring to try to take a look at where those impacts are and take into account some of the feedback that we heard after last year's seasons were set. So our initial modeling proposal for the tribes this year added in August for a retention fishery, half the month for Chinook back in August, and then open for coho retention after that. Because of the low returns to the Snohomish and continued low returns on wild fish, especially to the Skagit system, we've agreed we're going to reduce our fisheries in marine areas 8.1 and 8.2 directed at coho this year. On the table right now, we have a shoreline fishery, although I think we have it here as non-retention. Oh, this is Chinook season. Sorry about that. Chinook seasons, sorry, I didn't mean to confuse the 2 species. So we did have to move some stuff around with Chinook here. We took into consideration trying to move some blackmouth opportunity back into the fall in marine areas 8.1 and 8.2. We did keep June closed in area 11 to try to keep on addressing the Mid-Hood Canal issue. We did take some time away from marine areas 7 and 8.1 and 8.2, 1 month in area 7 and a half a month in 8.1 and 8.2 to try to compensate and address some of those Stillaguamish issues. So that's part of the Chinook initial modeling proposal. Coho, and I'm sorry I jumped around with species here. Coho, you'll see in marine areas 8.1 and 8.2 on the table currently, the proposal to the tribes is a shoreline only fishery for basically mid-August to mid-September. I did want to mention on Skagit coho, last year, right now it's a preliminary escapement estimate, but we were about 15,000 on our coho escapement, wild coho escapement in the Skagit last year. So that's another one we really have to keep an eye on and make sure that we're addressing those wild stock issues in those seasons. Other than that, coho seasons will right out the gate are relatively similar to last year. Like I said, we did add August opportunity back into area 7, but otherwise they're pretty similar. I might ask with this slide, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, but since a lot of these freshwater season proposed changes are in his area, Ed Leeser is our Region 4 Regional Fish Program Manager, and I might just get him to say a few words about our freshwater seasons and some of the stuff going on in freshwater fisheries in his area. Ed, don't mean to put you on the spot.
It's fine, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening, everybody. So a few things I wanted to mention were that are kind of out there this year is a closed season on the Snohomish. We feel we should be able to maintain some coho opportunity at Wallace because we have the hatchery there, so we'll have a limited mark selective fishery, but the initial modeling shows there's no way we're going to be able to have a Snohomish fishery, which is really disappointing for coho. But on the other hand, Chinook looks really good. We had preliminary talks with Toil Up today, and there seems to be Chinook available for harvest, so stay tuned for that. You also probably see a shorter coho season on the Skagit. And that's the coho, they really face the same extremes that the steelhead on the Skagit felt in 2015 when we had the marine blob. And then in the freshwater system, we had extreme droughts. And so both coho and steelhead faced a lot of stress from those events. So that's why we're seeing shorter coho seasons in the Snohomish, in the Skagit, throughout the Puget Sound. And to those same effects with chum, we're seeing historic lows for chum in the Skagit, the Stilly, the Snohomish, the Puyallup, and the Squally across the board. So there'll be a lot of chum closures, and later in the season, we'll be hitting some of you guys up to help us on some broodstock collection to get those fisheries back going. There's going to be some South Sound coho fishery closures, and like we did last year in the Samish, we'll have a shortened season. And the reason why we're doing that is we're really ramping up all our hatcheries for southern resident killer whale. And so we'll just have to, you know, pinch the season a little bit so we can get our brood stock. So in the next 5 years, we'll have really robust fisheries. So that's my update.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you jumping in. I'm going to put another staff member on the spot at this point. Derek Dapp, he is our lead Chinook modeler for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's also part of the Chinook Technical Committee through the Pacific Salmon Commission. I'm inviting him to hop on and go through some of our current Chinook and Coho modeling that we've done here in the past couple weeks. Derek?
Appreciate that introduction, Mark, and hello, everybody. Before I start going through the modeling itself, I thought I might explain a few acronyms for people who may be new to the process and just to kind of get everybody acquainted with what we're looking at here. So the first thing that we talk about in management of salmon is we talk about an ER, in exploitation rate. And just to let people know exactly what that metric that we're looking at is it's the percent of the adult population for a given stock that we're expected to take in our fisheries. There are different management objectives that we're using in relation to exploitation rates. So in some cases, we're looking at a total exploitation rate, which is looking at the exploitation rate for a given stock across all the fisheries that occur from Alaska all the way south to California. Sometimes we look at what's labeled here as an SUS exploitation rate, which stands for a Southern US exploitation rate. And that would be the exploitation rate of stock of all the fisheries that occur south of Canada. So including Puget Sound, including the Washington coastal area, and including Oregon and California as well. And then the other thing that we sometimes look at, for example, for Lake Washington and Green River on Puyallup, we look at what's called a pre-terminal SUS exploitation rate. So when you see that PT-SUS, what that stands for is it's the same as the SUS where it's exploitation that's occurring south of Canada, but only in the pre-terminal areas, i.e. that means not in the freshwater area and not in the areas that are directly adjacent to the river of origin for these stocks. So as we're going through here, you can see these are the stocks that we manage to for Chinook, and each one has a management objective that's associated with it. I might just start off by kind of going down the list of some of the stocks that we think are going to be most constraining, and then highlighting some of the stocks that we're currently exceeding our objectives on, but we think are less likely to be constraining. So as mentioned by Mark and David Stormer, the two stocks that we think are going to be most constraining this year are going to be Stillaguamish. And you see for Stillaguamish stock, we have actually 3 different management criteria for this year. We have a 22% total exploitation rate, an 8% unmarked SUS exploitation rate, and a 12% marked SUS exploitation rate. Of those 3 rates, you can see from our initial modeling, we're actually under on our total exploitation rate, but we're over on both our unmarked and marked SUS exploitation rates. At this time, we're thinking that the most constraining of those 3 rates is going to be the marked SUS exploitation rate. So another stock that Mark and David had mentioned as potentially being one that's constraining this year is Mid-Hood Canal. And for that one, right now we're in negotiations with our co-managers on a management objective there. But from our initial 2020 fisheries proposal in the high ocean option, we can see we're at 14.7%, which we think is likely to be a few percentage points higher than what our objective will land out to be. Some other stocks to highlight here. Skagit Spring Run, we can see that our management objective there for this year is a 10.3% SUS exploitation rate. And in our initial modeling proposal, we're at 20.7 or 20.7%. For that stock in particular, that management objective is based on being below a low abundance threshold that gets set for management. We think that through some in-river fishery changes and otherwise, we might be able to get above that low abundance threshold, and we might be managing to our objective if we exceed that threshold, which is less likely to make that stock constraining. We think that for Snohomish and Nisqually, there are two stocks that we're currently exceeding our objectives on, and they're stocks to continue looking out for and keeping in the back of our minds, but we think that they may be less constraining than Stillaguamish and Mid-Hood Canal. So thank you, Mark. So to look at kind of two of the stocks that we had mentioned might be our most constraining stocks, the Stillaguamish marked and the Mid-Hood Canal naturals. Right here, what we have in front of us is a breakdown in our marine sport fisheries of where those impacts are occurring in terms of exploitation rate by month and by area. So you can see when we're looking at a cell that's shaded in a darker red, that's an area that has more of that exploitation rate impact on the stocks of concern this year. So one thing that might quickly jump out to you is for Stillaguamish marked, we're noticing that the area with the greatest amount of exploitation is Marine Area 7, both in the summer and in the winter time period. However, it looks like there's also some pretty significant impacts that are occurring in areas 5, 6, and 9. For Mid-Hood Canal, one thing that's interesting to note there is that while the impacts are structured more across the board, I would note that more of the impacts are occurring in the summer relative to the winter, whereas for Stillaguamish marked, you get a mix of impacts occurring in both the summer and the winter. Mark, if we can move on to the next slide. And a few things about Coho modeling. As David had mentioned, probably what's going to be our most constraining stock here this year is going to be Snohomish. And what you would note there is that we have an exploitation or an escapement goal of 50,000 fish. And you can see kind of in our 3 ocean option model runs, you can see where that stock is falling out relative to the 50,000. So we're approximately around 29,000 fish, which fluctuates a little bit between ocean options. As far as other stocks to look out for, Skagit, Stillaguamish, and Hood Canal are all currently exceeding their management objectives, at least in one of the ocean options. But once again, we think that those will be less constraining stocks than the Snohomish stock. I might change it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Derek. Really appreciate that. I'm sure, stand by, because I'm sure your expertise will become valuable once we start answering questions. So obviously, there's a number of issues on the table. One that Derek talked about here in bullet point number 3, we are still currently do not have agreement with our co-managers on a management objective for the Mid-Hood Canal Chinook stock this year. We are in negotiations about that still currently, hoping to obviously have that resolved before the end of the process. And we'll do our best to keep people informed about any kind of new news or anything like that as we go through the process. If there's anything to report, we'll let you know. Obviously, unprecedented times we're living in right now. We have not had many, if any, in-person meetings with our tribal co-managers. We did have a couple during the Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting in California, but at that time, most of our tribal counterparts were not traveling. So, and obviously everybody knows things got worse from there. So we're still struggling to be able to have meetings. Obviously we're still having meetings. So we have those planned for the rest of the process for over the next 2 weeks, but it is a challenge to make sure everybody's coordinated and on the calls. There are some challenges to technology as well with feedback loops and other things. So we're working our way through that as we go. I want to talk a little bit about the timely agreement. Folks who are familiar with this process, remember that we are still on a year-to-year coverage for our Endangered Species Act permit. It is imperative that we try to come to an agreement with our co-managers coming at the end of the Pacific Fishery Management Council process so that we can turn over our agreed to fishing package and the modeling results to NOAA Fisheries for evaluation so that we can get a permit to start fishing by May 1. Obviously, we don't have very many fisheries starting on May 1, but it is important for everybody, tribes and us, to have that permit in place so we can begin our seasons at that time. Derek talked through the Stillaguamish and Mid-Hood Canal management objectives. Obviously, we're taking a look at all our fisheries, where those management objectives, where the constraints are, where we may need to do some fishery shaping to try to meet those objectives. David also talked about the low forecasted coho returns. Although we've laid some pretty significant cuts on the table right out the gate, I think we may have to make some more movements in order to meet those management objectives for both Snohomish, Skagit, Stillaguamish. The other one that I think everybody should be aware of, obviously we've been talking about this for a couple of years. It's still a very important part of this process, is that we need to be mindful of the needs of killer whales as we're crafting fisheries. We currently do not have a plan set in place for how we deal with those and how they're evaluated through NOAA Fisheries. We continue to work on that with our co-managers and NOAA so that we can all be in agreement on how we're evaluating fisheries impacts on killer whale needs. So with that, I'll move on to the next slide. I think we're going to leave this one up for a while as we move to the next portion of our meeting. I do want to let everybody know that we have our online commenting tool available on our website. You follow that link right there to public input, and we continue to update that daily. I think by tomorrow we're hoping to have freshwater season proposals on the website for everybody to view. We're updating that just as quick as we can, so keep checking the website for new materials about fisheries proposals, and please provide us your input there. We're gonna do our best to get through this next little while and answer your questions as best we can. I might ask if Kristen wants to be back and engaged, and we can think about starting down answering questions.
Yeah, thank you. This is Kristen again from Ross. So just a quick reminder before we jump into the queue. If you are on the phone, whether you're on GoTo or whether you're on the Zoom client or not, if you have called in via the phone, you're going to hit *9, and that'll let us know that you want to talk. That'll raise your hand. For those of you that are using computer audio, you can hit the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom dashboard, a little hand icon, and that'll get you lined up. So first up, we've got Ryan, and what I'm going to do, sorry, folks who are where I see names, I will say first name, last initial, and then we'll let you know that you're unmuted. For folks who are dialed in on the phone, I will be reading out the last 4 digits of the phone number you've called in from. So just be on the lookout for that. And then on your phone, you'll hear that you've been unmuted. You'll get a little audio cue. All right, so first up is Ryan H.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
We can, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank everybody for all the hard work they do. I would like to ask for boundary extensions on, if we get them, on spring Skagit and summer Skagit king fisheries. I would like to know if we can have the boundaries for the spring fishery be extended up to concrete, and for the summer fall to be extended down to concrete.
So thank you, Ryan, for your comment. I'm not sure if Edward wants to respond or if we can just say thank you for your comment and we'll take it into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can respond to that, Mark, because this is a fishery that we were really looking at possibly expanding both, you know, to the town of Concrete and as well as higher up in the Cascade. But what we're finding is, you know, with the different populations of Chinook and the Skagit, is one of the stocks that isn't doing so well is the Cascade stock. And because the different Chinook stocks are kind of mixed in space and time, it's really hard to expand that fishery because we'll be impacting some of those Cascade springs. And so we're going to be looking closer at what you just talked about. So thank you so much for that comment. If you have more ideas, please put them on the online commenting tool.
All right, great. Next up, we have a phone number. The last 4 digits are 3642. You should be unmuted now.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, my name is Sandy Atkinson, and I'm the Conservation Committee Chairman for the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club. And our club is very concerned about the game fish season closures on the Stillaguamish River in the summer and fall. And what we're coming into potentially is the 3rd consecutive year for such closures. So we're concerned that this will become the new normal and the river will never reopen for game fish in the summer and fall. So my question is, what is the plans for game fish for this summer and fall on the Stillaguamish River?
So Sandy, thank you for that question. And this is Mark Baltzell. I'll try to answer it, and then I may ask Ed to jump in or any other folks from Region 4. I would say that we hear you. The game fish seasons on the Stillaguamish are important to us too. I know we almost had a deal in place last year to make that happen, and it kind of fell apart last minute. So just, I guess, right out the gate, know that it's a priority for us. I think the department, in talks with both our tribal co-managers and internally, I think we're trying to develop plans for some creel surveys on a number of systems where we can try to start to address some of our co-manager concerns for fishing effort and encounters with non-target species, those kind of things. So just like I said, know that it's important and know that we hear you on this fishery. And Ed, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
You did a really good job of explaining that, Mark. Getting game fish seasons back in the Stillaguamish is a high priority, and that's kind of where we started our modeling for fisheries this year. So hopefully we'll get there soon, Sandy.
All right, we have another phone number. Last 4 are 2218.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, this is Kevin Kelly. A couple quick questions about the Samish. Do you have what the proposed dates are yet?
So I don't necessarily have the start date. I imagine it's a pretty typical start date, but I think we were looking at ending in the middle of September, if my memory serves me correctly.
We need to go as far towards the end of September as you can because the fishery doesn't really pick up until towards the end of August. Peak has always been around the 15th of September, so if you can go a week or 2 after September, that would be a big help.
We will definitely take that into consideration. Obviously, with our lower forecasted return than previous years, I think we're really looking to just make sure that all our users for that particular run have an opportunity. So just we're trying to carve out a little bit of opportunity for everybody this year and make sure that we get enough brood stock. That's an important brood for everybody in that basin. So thank you.
How many fish do you need for that? Because I know you had a large number, what was it, over 7,000 fish get to the hatchery last year?
And I'll let Ed talk to our brood stock needs for that area.
Okay. Second question is, I know Brett had proposed it last year. What about us taking jacks?
We can definitely have that conversation. I would be all for it. So, and maybe I'll let Ed lay in on that one too.
It's been brought up for a few years. I know it was actually on the paperwork you handed out in Mill Creek last year, and then it never materialized.
And pardon my memory failure, I don't have a recollection as to why it didn't materialize last year.
Okay.
And I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I might have seen Brett on the phone call. If he wants to weigh in, we could unmute him, but if not, I'm not sure he's connected to audio. So.
Okay.
I can answer these questions, Mark. So last year on the Samish, we were open from August 1st through September 22nd, and we were able to achieve our broodstock goal. And our broodstock goal is around that 7,000 number. We did not waste one female last year. We used every single female that came back. We used every last egg.
Good. That's good to know. There's people going to want to know about that.
Yeah, it's a really important fishery to not just us, but to Lummi Nation. And in order to achieve these increased goals for southern resident killer whale, we really had to juice up the production, which we did.
No, that answers that question, because I've had people bring that up saying, well, they got so many fish back. Why couldn't we keep fishing?
Can we jump to our next question or comment?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got, before I jump to the next one, just want to remind folks that we are using the hand raising feature. We are not taking comments via the Q&A box. So if you get your hand raised, we can get you in the queue. And again, that's *9 if you're on your phone, or the little hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. Looks like a little hand. So next up, we've got Tori B.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
I actually have 3 quick questions. The first one is, are we going to have a coho season on Stilly?
So this is Mark. Currently, we do have a coho season on Stilly. That is the plan at this point. There should be enough fish to be able to have a rec fishery on the Stilly.
Okay, and then on the Skagit, you mentioned that the coho season was going to be reduced and there was some changes going on there. What are we looking at as far as the Skagit, and is it going to affect the hatchery seasons at all, like on the Cascade and the terminal areas? What's the deal with that one?
So I think on the Skagit, the current proposal that we have in front of the co-managers is through October 31st on the main stem. And then I think through the middle of November on the Cascade. The daily limit on the main stem would be 2 coho, and on the Cascade, we'd keep it at 4.
Thank you. And my final question is going to be, what is the status on the Baker Lake sockeye run? And what could we look like for fisheries?
So we didn't really go over it in our presentation. Sockeye returns to both Lake Washington and Baker Lake are extremely poor this year. I think the last forecast I saw, I think it's close to official, was around 16 or 17,000 projected to come back this year. We expect that there will be very little, if any, sockeye fishing this year. It'll probably be some CNS. You know, that's one of those we don't really know until it comes back. We're hoping that maybe towards the end of the run, there'll be enough fish to maybe have a little bit of a lake fishery. But I think at this point, we're not necessarily planning any fisheries.
Okay. So if the fish return, then it could open, but it's going to be dependent on the trap counts then.
That's what I would say at this point, and I'd open it up to any of my agency counterparts on the line, if you have a different opinion or perspective, I'm happy to entertain that.
Okay, that'll be it. Thank you so much.
Apologies, quick mute problem there. All right, next up we have another phone caller. It's going to be 2615.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. We're getting a little bit of an echo. Can you mute your computer? Or turn the volume really far down?
How's that?
Much better. Thank you so much.
All right. I wanted to know if you could get a little bit more specific about the most constraining stock in Puget Sound, most likely affecting, largely affecting marine fishing opportunity. The Stiligwamish marked hatchery fish. The estimate from the modeling that was displayed showed a total impact of 19% approximately, and the objective is to get to 12. Those estimates are both tribal and non-tribal fisheries. And I wonder if you could explain or just delve into a bit more detail and describe what you think is the reduction needed for state-managed, mostly sport fisheries, to achieve the objective. Thank you.
Thanks, and I hope I'm not calling him out because I recognize the voice, but thanks, Pat. I'm hoping Derek can help me out with this. I'm not sure I've got all of the details in front of me. Yes, you are correct at that exploitation rate that was displayed on the screen, and if nobody minds, maybe I could go back. I could try to maneuver back on my presentation here in a second, but yeah, and Derek, do you have any specifics on how that those exploitation rates are split on the mark stock? And again, sorry for putting you on the spot here.
No, that's okay, Mark. And yeah, I would say that the non-treaty impact on the marked stock, just for the Puget Sound fisheries, is a little bit over 9%. I believe it's 9.1% in the high ocean option run. And so you can see that with a 12% objective, 9% of the non-treaty only, that's a pretty big portion.
Does that...
So this is Pat. Then to respond to that, I think that's getting at it more specifically. It's then approximately, with the most recent modeling that was done that you've displayed, the depending on the fisheries that are described, and not focusing on tribal fisheries, for the non-Indian fisheries, the sport fisheries, the impacts as was displayed are concentrated in some areas, but they're spread throughout the most popular fisheries in areas 5 through 11, I guess you could say, and there are significant impacts. And so what would you like to hear from the recreational fishing interests as far as proposals to move as quickly as we can to alternative strategies to achieve the conservation objective?
Thanks, Pat, and appreciate that. You always have great questions. I think really for the department, Pat, it's about us trying to understand what our sport fishing priorities are. I know you're familiar because we've had lots of conversations. Some of the metrics that the department looks at when we're trying to craft fisheries is overall angler opportunity. We hear a lot about time on the water. You know, the department also looks at angler trips as a metric of how we try to evaluate opportunity. You know, what can we get kind of the biggest bang for the buck for our kind of exploitation rate buck. You know, before I kind of say my next statement, I understand that, you know, our blackmouth fisheries are quite popular amongst a big segment of our constituency. They enjoy that time out on the water. It's a really great fishery for those who know how to fish it, and it can be a great enjoyable time on the water because you don't have kind of the masses of people targeting Chinook in the winter period that you do in the summer. But, you know, I think if we're looking at those metrics from kind of a department where we're looking at angler trips and the biggest bang for our buck, I think we would tend to look more towards winter fisheries where participation is lower and those kind of things. And we do have kind of higher impacts in some of those winter fisheries. So we, through, you know, agency commission policy, we look at kind of spreading our fisheries opportunities geographically throughout the Sound. We never want to take too huge of a hit out of one area. I know a lot of Area 7 constituents felt like we did that last year. We felt like we preserved a lot of opportunity elsewhere last year by closing August in Area 7. I think we tried to address that with some of our initial proposals this year, but long rambling answer. But I think those are all things that we consider as we're trying to kind of weave our way through crafting a fisheries package, Pat.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And I want to compliment you on the great job you're doing in working through this difficult, in particular, this difficult year, in communicating with me. You've been very available, and that I really appreciate that. But let me then, I don't think it would be good for this meeting, this virtual meeting, to get into specifics. I think that would take too much time. But I have some ideas about what might be done to minimize the loss of angler opportunity and still manage for the objectives that the WDFW has agreed with the tribes on for these stocks, and specifically focusing on the impacts of this Stillaguamish marked hatchery fish. It's particularly difficult, but I think the ideas range from looking at size limit increases to constraints by area and time, and they range from focused on Area 7, where the highest impact is, to a more broad-based proportional reduction in fishing opportunity to address the issues that you just mentioned. And I think it might be best to work through the Puget Sound Sport advisors to develop that and get it to you as soon as possible before the March 31st North of Falcon meeting, rather than getting into those deals at this point in time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. And yes, I was going to suggest exactly what you were describing is please reach out. And I think we have an advisory call this Friday, although I haven't gotten the details to you folks yet. Yeah, let's see if we can have some of that stuff developed for next Tuesday's meeting. Obviously, we're really hoping that, you know, I think captive audience all day that day online. So I think we're willing to work through all these issues with folks and try to get you the information that you need, so you can obviously provide us the information that we need to make better decisions about seasons. So thanks for that, Pat.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Riley F.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you. So, hey, Mark, hi, everyone. I just wanted to ask that due to the closures that we're now going to see for 2 weeks on all of our blackmouth fisheries, if you feel that there'll be any appreciable, you know, increases in quota or time on water during our summer Chinook fisheries, as a result of these closures during our winter fisheries?
So the quick and dirty answer to that, Riley, is no. We normally don't transfer any kind of, if you want to call them available impacts or unused impacts from the winter fishery. We don't really transfer those to a kind of a new fishing year, new fishing season. The way we do modeling is kind of static year to year, although we do take some of the winter fishery information into account when we're going into the next season. We don't really use it for modeling very much. And if I misspoke, Derek, please correct me. But I think the quick and dirty answer to your question is no, we're not going to be transferring any impacts to the summer fishery.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and next we have a phone number. Last four are 9748.
Hey, this is Brandon. So, question: what is it going to take to get the Area 4B to the CQ River Marine Area 5 line, get that fishing back to where we butt up against each other? Is the reasoning why it's at Sail and Seal Rock instead of where 4 and 5 meet up? Is there a savings? Or is there, what's the reasoning behind having it sit so far to the ocean?
So I'll attempt to answer your question, Brandon, and then I might ask if Kyle Addix is available and can help me out with this one. My best answer to it, Brandon, is most years we have differing regulations between Marine Area 4 and Marine Area 5 in CQ. I think we keep that closure in place to try to ensure that for the most part, we know it doesn't happen all the time, but for the most part, people fishing in Nia Bay Area 4 are landing in Nia Bay, and that folks fishing in Area 5 or CQ area are landing in CQ. We do separate catch estimates and separate accounting. That's the best answer I can think of right off the top of my head. And I might ask Kyle if he has a different explanation in place for that one.
I don't, Mark. I'd have to look back at the history of it and when the last time that wasn't in place was, but it's been there for a while.
Okay, so depending on what goes on this year, if the public's not allowed to go on to reservations and stuff, I would like to just throw out there that would at least give the recreational guys opportunity to be able to fish back in Marine Area 4. And if there isn't any savings on something like that, I would like to have that drop back to the 4-5 line if that is something we could do. I mean, there's a couple things too. If it's wild stock we're worried about or what have you, at least maybe have it open for hatchery only. But if it does ding us and there is savings, then I understand. But if not, it would be nice to get it brought back down closer to CQ.
Thank you for that, Brandon. And at the risk of kind of jumping out in front ahead of this issue, I'm sure that depending on how things go in the near future with fisheries, if the reservation remains closed during the summer, I think looking at that boundary is something that we're going to have to look at as far as being able to just evaluate each fishery and sample it. Obviously, it's just important that we are able to estimate and evaluate these fisheries for their impacts on endangered species. So, but you understand that. So thanks for that. Obviously, we'll be in touch with you on this issue as we go forward in time, but appreciate the comment and the thought.
Yep. Thanks, Mark.
All right, so just another quick reminder, if you do want to get in the queue to raise your hand, if you're on the phone, it's *9. And if you're on the Zoom client, it's the little raise the hand button, which looks like a little hand at the bottom of the Zoom window. So next up, we've got Brett R.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, Mark, I brought this up before about moving the Chinook fishery in August to the right and giving us the last 2 weeks instead of the first 2 weeks. And I'm hoping you're continuing to look at it, but I wanted to kind of mention it on this phone call to see if we get other people aware of what we might be able to do here and see if we might get any other comments. But as I said in the past, the opportunity for Chinook is much greater in Area 7 in the latter part of August than the earlier part. And I just want to see if you have any comments on that.
Thanks, Brett. I did hear this comment before, and I think we're, from a modeling perspective or a fishery evaluation perspective, it's really kind of a wash. We look at that fishery and we model it by a month time step, and the time step in the Chinook model is July, August, and September. So the way it works is we just have different effort scalars for each of those months. That helps us kind of determine what those impacts are. So I don't think it would be a huge deal to try to move that to the last 2 weeks. It just may look kind of funny from a fisheries management point of view, but definitely something we can consider. I don't think it would mess with sampling too much. So yeah, definitely something we'll take into consideration, Brad.
Yeah, I know it looks choppy, but you know, as far as the season goes, but you know, for those guys that are on the water, it would make total sense.
Hey, Brett, this is Derek here. The one other thing that might be worthwhile to look into if we're considering the latter half of August rather than the early half is that we've currently modeled the first part of August as a mark selective fishery for Chinook. And we might just check into the mark rate and see how the mark rate looks in the beginning half of August relative to the second half.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. One more thing to throw in there, there's been mention of the 28-inch, 26-inch, and if that's able to save us, if you will, because I know this hasn't been really presented or been in discussion with the co-managers yet, so we have a ways to go on this. And as an option to keep it open in August, be willing to, you know, go with the larger fish, you know, the 26-inch or 28-inch rule.
Thanks, Brett. I think we're going to try to do some modeling before next Tuesday to try to evaluate that and see what the effects of that kind of do on that fishery. So thanks for that.
Yep, I just really appreciate you guys trying to get August back open for us. That's very important, and I just want to thank you for it again.
Appreciate the thanks, Brett.
Hey, Mark, this is Kyle.
Go ahead.
I tried to jump in at the end of Brandon's. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in the council process for what it means if Nia Bay and or La Push aren't open to the public when the recreational seasons and the commercial troll seasons too, for that matter, roll around this spring and summer. So it's something that I'm sure will get a lot of discussion at the April council now webinars.
Thank you for that follow-up, Kyle.
So Mark, right now we don't have any other hands up. I just want to do a quick check. Oh, never mind. We have another one from Mark S.
Go ahead with your question.
Hey, Mark, it looks like, oh, can you talk? Can you test your audio?
Can you hear me now?
We can, yep.
Yes, my name is Mark Shinman. I have a question about the Area 7 winter Chinook fishery. This year it was open in February. In one of the slides, it looks like this year it's going to open in March. I'd like to understand the reasoning, the logic behind that, if I could.
Sure, Mark. This is Mark Baltzell. You just heard Brett talk about thanking us for trying to get a August fishery back in place in Area 7. I'm sure you saw on some of the other slides or heard us discuss that Area 7 is kind of ground zero when it comes to impacts on the Stillaguamish stock. So we find large numbers of, or larger than many of our other marine areas, numbers of Stillaguamish fish caught in that fishery. I think that from the department's point of view, we wanted to address the needs of the constituents we heard from in Area 7 regarding that summer season and how important it was to them. And I think that was an attempt by the department to find balance in our fisheries package, knowing that we didn't want to come into this fishing negotiation north of Falcon time with bigger impacts on Stillaguamish than we had last year. Knowing that we had concerns with this stock and knowing that we had some work to do to get down to those management objectives. That was what, so to put simply, to answer your question, it was a trade-off, right? We added some time back in the summer, but we felt like we needed to try to stay as neutral as possible on our impacts on that Stillaguamish stock.
I heard Brett's comments and I agree with him. I appreciate it being more open in August, and I agree with Brett, the end of August would be better. But I also remember us seeing a slide, something about the stilly, and trying to get up with my phone, stilly impacts. And if I remember, in February, the slide showed 0% impacts from the stilly in February. So that stimulated my question.
Hey, this is Derek. So if we could go back to the slide maybe that he's referring to, Mark.
And I think it's because we haven't modeled anything in February is why there's a 0 there.
That's exactly right, Mark. So the slide that you're looking at here, the impacts here represent the current fishery proposal for Puget Sound. And so if there's a 0 in there, it typically signifies that it's closed to salmon fishing. Or it also could be that there's not any coated wire tag recoveries there, and therefore no impacts.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. So there are impacts, they're just not modeled.
Correct.
Thank you.
The next person we have is Bart M. And Bart, you should be unmuted now.
Go ahead, Bart, if you have a question or a comment.
Bart, if you don't have a microphone on your computer, you may need to call in on the phone. Oh my God. All right, Bart, we're just gonna note your name and we'll try to come back to you in a few minutes. If you're able to get on the phone, let us know if we unmute you on the phone so we know not to come back to you.
And the next person is phone number 4172.
Hi, folks. Hi, folks. How are you? Couple questions. Looking at the wild coho returns south of the Snohomish, what is the reasoning behind Area 10 non-selective harvest?
So some of you may or may not be familiar with our management regime for coho. It's called the Comprehensive Coho Management Plan. Essentially, what that plan directs the department to do is basically from Area 10 South, essentially we're managing those coho stocks for hatchery returns. So hatchery returns is where we prioritize our management for essentially Area 10 South when it comes to coho.
Wouldn't it be prudent to have wild release then, since it seems like you're kind of giving up on the South Sound wild coho?
Well, I would say that that's far from the truth. I would say that we're really limited in what opportunities we can provide because we have this agreed to management plan in place with our co-managers. You know, I don't think it's any secret that a number of our co-managers don't necessarily like mark selective fisheries. It is a management tool that the department uses and uses extensively, but that doesn't mean that we get to just use it wherever and whenever we want to. All of our fisheries are put in place by agreement, and part of that agreement is these management plans that we have in place. So I think in some ways we're limited by what we can do. We have had those discussions before, and I would say if folks remember, I think it was 2017, we actually were marked selective in Area 10 after we had the 2016 closure. So it's not unprecedented, but I think, you know, it's not necessarily something that we regularly employ as part of our coho management regime.
Okay. Appreciate the response. Going back to Area 10, which opens June 1st, would you consider delaying that opening to July 1st to allow for larger fish, and then in years of good abundance also opening Marine Area 9 for hatchery retention of coho?
I think that's a great idea. That June opportunity was actually responding to, we've seen some significant increases in our resident coho populations here over the last number of years. For folks who have participated in that Area 10 opportunity in June, we've seen some pretty significant catches and participation in that fishery. So we know guys like getting out and catching those fish at that time. We have in the past had some of that opportunity in Area 9 in July. Obviously, if we think we can fit it in with our overall impact regime and be able to offer those opportunities, it's definitely something we could consider, and we'll run your suggestion through some of our modeling and see if it's something that we can fit into this year's package.
Yeah, my point being is I think people, you know, you give those fish another month to grow, and I think people would appreciate the size of the fish versus the June fish versus July. A couple other comments or questions maybe. The mid-canal Chinook, are those strays of the Skokomish, or are those truly wild fish?
Loaded question there. I think it depends on who you're talking to and in what context. I think to directly answer your question, I think the co-managers are in agreement that stock was comprised of hatchery strays. We tried to bring it along with a supplementation program for a number of years, which has failed. So that 39 fish returning essentially is what you're seeing as remnants of that failed supplementation program. Right now, the co-managers are in agreement on moving forward with trying something different. I think we've heard in our continued discussions with NOF Fisheries that they'd like us to try a different supplementation program, kind of one more college try on a supplementation program. So I think we're moving away from a fall stock consideration to maybe more of a spring stock. Obviously, it's going to take several years to get that program in place. We're actually hoping to kickstart it here in the next year. We're under lots of different discussions with our co-managers on this aspect. So we're working on some habitat work right now to try to kickstart that as fast as we can. Now, I think if we're talking about this in terms of ESA and getting a permit, then yes, it is considered a wild stock. It's considered part of our management constraint that we need to meet every year in order to get our ESA permit. Like I said, it depends on who you're talking to and in what context. But I think if we're talking about things in general from a co-manager perspective, there is an agreement that what was there is no longer there, and we need to do something different.
Okay, I just, there's a lot of fish coming back to the stoke that it seems like if you're gonna, if this is a stock of concern and you've got 39 fish, there's a lot of opportunity that could possibly be lost if that's an area where you're looking at. So a couple other things, I'll just make comments. Again, my name is Brian Stone. As far as the stilly cuts, I'd like to see that open. I just don't see where saving a Chinook or two for closing a game fish opportunity is somewhat ridiculous. And then furthermore, in the future with coho abundance, if there is enough fish, and I understand the Snohomish is the constraining stock here, that I'd like to see an opportunity to go back to the old days where we can actually fish Area 9 in October, maybe shore-based only, something to consider.
Any fishing opportunity that we can stick back out on the water is something that we'd love to consider. So thanks for that.
All right. I appreciate all your work, and thank you for taking my comments and questions.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on.
You bet.
Okay, the next person we have is for number 3642. And you are now unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, this is Sandy Atkinson again. I have a question about the Chinook stocks on the Stilly. I thought that the big concern on the Stilly was the low escapement of wild Chinook, but you are indicating that the constraining factor are the marked fish. So could you provide some further detail of why the marked Chinook are more of a constraining factor on the Stilly?
Sure, Sandy, I'll do my best. And again, I'm going to offer it up to any of my colleagues who are here on the format with us. If I misspeak or they want to add something too, please feel free to jump in. So the reason the marked fish on the Stilly are important are they are part of the conservation program on the Stilly. They take wild fish and they use that for broodstock, and they build up this conservation hatchery program. So those fish are marked with an adipose fin, and they have coated wire tags inside their snout, and they are released as part of the Stilly stock. And one of the things that folks may or may not know about kind of the fisheries that happen north of us, especially in Canada, is they don't have robust sampling and monitoring programs like we do down here. Essentially, they're really only sampling fish without an adipose fin. And so why that conservation program is important is it allows us to detect that impact on fisheries that happen north of us, right? So if Canada's only sampling marked fish, we're never really going to know what the impact on that Stillaguamish stock is unless we have this different program that's able to kind of show those impacts in Canadian fisheries on that stock. So that's why it's important. Now, the reason it's constraining this year is a funky little thing that happened with the age composition in the forecast of the returning fish. If people look at the overall abundances of what came back last year or what was forecasted to come back last year and what is returning this year, it's relatively similar, but those age compositions on the returning stocks are really what's different. And that's what's causing higher exploitation, especially in our winter fisheries. because of the age composition is a big section of 2 and 3-year-olds on the hatchery stock. So I hope I've explained that a little bit. And again, I'd invite any of my colleagues to jump in on that as well.
All right, thanks for the additional detail.
More than welcome.
Okay, and the next person we have is phone number 9748, and you should be unmuted now.
Hey, this is Brandon again. So I just was wanting to say one more thing on that 4-5 line too that I forgot to mention is where there's just so much uncertainty with gates being opened or closed throughout the season this year. The businesses had also reached out to me and said that we're over the last few years, the quota's been reduced and they couldn't fish in Nia Bay. That would put more pressure here in CQ. With that being said, we could be closed down earlier, and having that line move closer, that could help alleviate some of the pressure, and these businesses could go on, because a shutdown, everybody leaves and they don't come back because we're a destination. So not really a question, just a little something to, so you guys can think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. And I know we've said this to you guys in the past. We do our best, I would say, statewide, both in our ocean fisheries program and in Puget Sound, to do right by our fishing communities as the best we can, and that includes CQ and Nia Bay. So thanks again for your comments.
And the next person we have is phone number 4172. Sorry about that. And you should be allowed to talk. You should be unmuted now.
Hi, Brian Stone again. Hey, you mentioned South Sound, Coho. There's been some issues there as far as restricted fisheries. Could you go into a little more detail of that?
Well, I'm not sure that we've worked out those details internally, but I will say that we're looking at lower natural returns on both the Puyallup and Nisqually systems. Knowing some of those co-manager discomforts with mark selective fisheries, I think we're trying to figure out ways to, and have discussions with those co-managers about the potential for mark selective fisheries. I think the outlook for the Nisqually is a little worse than the Puyallup. We do have quite a bigger hatchery return on the Puyallup than we do on the Nisqually. I think those are the two systems that we're really looking for potential modifications in fisheries. I can't really say at this point that we've landed on a singular proposal. Hope to have that wrapped up again, like I said, by tomorrow, and have a proposal up on the web for people to view. But and it's probably going to take some continued conversations with our co-managers on exactly what we're doing with wild coho. I really appreciated the comment earlier about kind of what's the deal with coho management. We often ask those kind of questions internally too, and try to keep in mind our mission and our mandate when it comes to preserving, protecting, and perpetuating these wild stocks. So thanks for that. And like I said, it's mostly just on the Puyallup and Nisqually where we're looking to make changes.
Yeah, well, since those fish all swim through Area 10, it just seems to me like a mark selective fishery in Area 10 would be beneficial to those fish, but I'm not in the management side, but that's just my opinion.
Appreciate your opinion.
Thank you.
We've got a little lull in hand. I'd like to try to circle back to Bart M. if we can really quick. Bart, I'm gonna allow you to talk and see if we can get you off mute in case you still have a question or comment.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. One of my questions was kind of answered by a previous caller, but my questions have to do with Mid-Hood Canal stock. I've actually got two questions. The first one was in 2001, I believe it was, Mike from Mike's Dive Shop released about 200,000 Chinook salmon. Is these the fish that we're calling Mid-Hood Canal stock? That's my first question.
I don't have any familiarity with what was released in 2001, so I'm not really sure I can answer that question.
So Mark, maybe I can jump in.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So that population had been identified as an independent population through the review process that went on with the ESA listing of Puget Sound Chinook. I'm not exactly sure when that was completed, but prior to the date you're talking about, I think there was already a supplementation program in place trying to restore those runs by then. There were some marine net pen programs in Hood Canal in the mid to late 90s. We know fish from those strayed into mid-Hood Canal streams. There were supplementation releases to try to jumpstart the populations, and there were hatchery strays from Hood Sport Hatchery, other places into those streams. So no, the release you're talking about would not have been the fish that led to identification of the Mid-Hood Canal streams as an independent population. The group that kind of made that determination looked at records back into the 1930s on fish spawning in those streams to make that identify that as an independent population. So I hope that helps.
You're saying that. You're saying absolutely no, that those fish didn't return and repopulate.
I don't know if the fish I don't know anything about the release you're talking about. Some of those could have wound up in the Mid-Hood Canal streams, but they were not the reason that was identified as an independent population.
Okay, my second question is, on your chart, you show Marine Area 11 has a 0.6% impact on those, but the Hood Canal only has a 0.2%. Those fish are unmarked. How do you know the impact?
I'll shoot that one over to our modeler, Derek Tapp.
Hey there. So for all of the stocks in the model, we have kind of a stock that indicates and represents those stocks, and it's based on a hatchery stock. So for Hood Canal, the way that it's modeled, at least for Chinook, is there's kind of an aggregate-based modeling for Hood Canal stocks in our model. And what I mean by that is Hood Canal fall fingerlings all get rolled together as Skokomish, the Hood Sport hatchery stock, as well as the Mid-Hood Canal fish. And so the representation of that stock is actually coded wire tags from the George Adams, that's the Skokomish program, as well as the Hood Sport hatchery programs. So coded wire tags from those stocks are what are being used to represent the Hood Canal fall fingerling aggregate, of which the Mid-Hood Canal fish are a subcomponent.
So basically this number is not factual. You're going by hatchery fish caught and claiming a percentage of the 39 fish that are returning there with really no evidence. Am I off base, or is that pretty accurate?
I would say that along the West Coast, the representation of wild stocks is generally by hatchery fish from the region of release. And so while you are correct that these are representing hatchery fish, there's an assumption that the hatchery fish represent the distribution of the wild stocks.
So what does the 0.6% represent? One fish? I mean, a number that, you know, if we're impacting them, how many are we truly impacting? That must be a good question.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's a direct answer to your question. I mean, I think we try to quantify our impacts on these stocks with the tools that are available to us. and what NOAA Fisheries finds acceptable for us on an available impact in order to get our ESA permit. You know, we're really just trying to do our best to make sure that we get these fisheries in place and under the rules that govern how we do things. So really, we can argue all day about whether or not the Mid-Hood Canal is an actual stock that we need to manage for, but for right now, for today, for 2021 fisheries, it is, and NOAA says that we need to get down to this certain percentage rate in order to get a fishing permit. So that's what we're gonna do.
So they're breaking down 0.6% of 39 fish to affect everything. I mean, those numbers don't sound very good to me.
Nobody said ESA was a party.
Well, okay. Well, thanks for taking my question.
Absolutely.
All right, so just another reminder, we got *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone, and using the raise hand button on the bottom of the Zoom window if you are on the computer, using computer audio. Got a little pause here in questions and comments, Mark. I'm not actually seeing any additional hands.
Well, maybe this is a good time just to talk through.
Oh, wait, we have a person who raised their hand. Carl N., you are now going to be allowed to talk, and you should be unmuted.
Go ahead, Carl.
Carl, it looks like you might be muted locally.
Oh, how about now? You got me?
There we go.
Perfect.
Yes.
So
Gotcha.
sorry to interrupt, guys. It was a very short question. Just wondering if you might have a summary or any documents after this meeting, since I got sidetracked and missed most of it. That's
Yeah, sorry about that, Carl. So I think we did try to get some meeting materials up on the website earlier. This presentation should be up on the website if I'm remembering what my colleagues and I did earlier today. So all these materials should be on the website. I would offer to you all that if for whatever reason you don't find something that you're looking for, you have my number or my email, please feel free to reach out. We'll try to get you whatever questions answered that you need answered.
Thank you, Mark.
It's almost like we planted that comment question.
So yeah, and that's just so everybody knows, under the meeting info page on our website is where you'll find this. And I believe, and Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, following this, it may not be till tomorrow morning, but following this, you will be able to click on the link and listen to the conversation from tonight. And you can, obviously if people miss this meeting, you can send it to your friends and let them know that they can listen in to what happened tonight. So.
And that's right. We should have that link ready to go by tomorrow. There's a little bit of a lag in the technology, and it looks like we do have one more hand raised. Rick S. And Rick, you might be muted locally. I'm going to try one more time.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear
hello,
you.
hello?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So the Strait of Juan de Fuca had, I've been out there many times and caught 15 wilds to 3 hatchery fish. Have you guys considered opening it up to the first 2 coho caught?
So yeah, thanks for that comment. I'm sure you're talking about the late season opportunity there in the Straits. We know that opportunity is really important for those communities up there. we know that the mark rate falls off significantly towards the end of September, and that yes, keeping that open for mark selective retention sometimes doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, it also doesn't make a whole lot of sense to open wild retention up there. We've been kind of under the gun on that Strait of Juan to Fuca stock. We haven't really met our wild escapement goals on that in the last couple of years. So that's one that's actually in the overfish status for the council fisheries, Pacific Fishery Management Council and Pacific Salmon Treaty. So it's one that we really try to balance the needs of the fishing communities out there and you know, the needs of the fishermen to provide opportunities. So appreciate that. Know that you're not the first person that's brought our that to our attention as far as, you know, the whole releasing too many wild fish. The numbers just don't work out, and for us to be able to offer that wild opportunity in the recent past, we're really hoping that these wild stocks rebound and that we're able to get that opportunity back in place in the future.
All right, looks like we've got another lull in hand. So again, *9 if you're on the phone, or the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom window. I'm not seeing anyone else at this time.
Well,
oh, Rick, you know what? Did we accidentally, hold on one second. Looks like Rick might want to jump back in. Rick, go ahead.
Thank you. I had one more question.
Sorry about that, Rick. That was my fault.
Yeah. On the marked fish, you know, in 3 days that I went fishing, we must have caught 30 fish that were, you know, 5% were hatchery, and we didn't leave with a lot of fish. So why are we seeing so many wild fish compared to hatchery? And are all the fish at the hatcheries being clipped, or are the tribes releasing fish that aren't clipped?
So the simple answer to you, and I don't know if you're specifically referring to last year.
Yes.
We saw a really significant underperformance in our hatchery forecast for last year for Coho. We saw a lot of the same signs on last year's return that we saw from our 2015 return. We had small body size. We had low fecundity in a lot of our hatchery programs. A number of our hatchery programs, we barely made escapement or broodstock collection goals for those programs. So last year, you probably saw a big difference in the amount of hatchery fish because the hatchery fish didn't come back last year like we had predicted. So we really saw that at the end of August start to materialize in our sampling and monitoring programs, and really tracked it the rest of the way through the month, where I'm not sure we saw a mark rate over 30% through the whole month of September last year. So totally understand those. To answer your marking comment, I would say 9 times out of 10, yes, those hatchery fish are getting marked. There was an incident this year where, because of some of the construction that's been going on at the Sioux Creek hatchery this year, some of those hatchery fish out of the Green River didn't get marked this year on this year's return. But I would say that stuff like that's an anomaly. We have really good working relationships with our co-managers and their hatcheries. A lot of times they're using our staff from the agency to mark and tag those fish. Yeah, I would say for the most part, except for maybe some smaller double index tagging programs, we do mark all those hatchery fish.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So this would probably be a good time to remind folks, next Tuesday, you probably heard us talking about it as well. We will probably be back here with you in this format again. Not sure if we were planning on doing just this format or if we were planning on doing live streaming as well. I think that's yet to be determined, but stay tuned. We'll try to have plenty of information up on our website ahead of time. And always please keep checking the websites. We indicated earlier we're going to be offering daily meetings as part of the PFMC process all the way through those days. That would have normally been down in Vancouver this year, but we will be doing it virtually. We are committing to holding daily meetings with our constituents, providing updates as we can through the process, and hopefully getting to the end on or about April 10th with an agreement on a fishing package for the next year. I guess I'll just pause there and see if there's any other questions or comments before we wrap it up for tonight. Well, again, thanks to everyone from Raw Strategic for helping us out get through this. Really appreciate all their help and assistance as we navigate through this. Hopefully we'll be all Zoom experts by the time we get to the end. Thanks again to all the staff who are here with me tonight. Really appreciate their help and participation and support as we go forward. And again, really appreciate to everyone on the line for taking the time to be with us, ask great questions throughout the evening. We really appreciate everybody's participation. And again, your input is welcomed and we look at it. It's online at the public input page. And thanks again, everybody. And we look forward to hopefully talking to you next Tuesday.
Yeah, just echoing the thanks. And if anybody has any direct comments about the use of Zoom, feel free to use that email you see on the screen right now, the twendell@rawstrategic. We're really happy to receive any feedback. Unfortunately, I can't unmute everyone at the same time, so I just want to say have a great evening and thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.